Welcome to the 27th edition of On Data and Design. I'm Darian, your host for tonight. Tonight, we were scheduled to have three talks on responsible design. Unfortunately, Gabrielle had to cancel last minute due to health reasons. Gabrielle, if you're watching, get well soon. However, I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for tonight. It's Reg Abos and Cathryn Ploehn. Each speaker will have 20 minutes for their talks. Feel free to ask questions on Slido. The link is below. I will even, during the talks, I will show a QR code so you can scan it and ask questions there. After the talk, we will have a discussion based on your questions. So feel free also to upvote questions because the questions which are most voted, they are coming up. So we will ask these questions. That was my very short introduction. Also, today's session will be shorter, so 1/3 shorter. And now, Reg, the stage is yours.
All right, thanks, Darian. I'll just
You're welcome.
present screen. Yep. Can everybody see that?
Yes, it works.
Yeah, great. Okay, so hello, everyone. I'm probably about 6 hours ahead of everyone else, so hello from the future. My name is Reg, and I'm a designer, an educator, and researcher, practicing largely in the area of socially responsible design through the lens of both data visualization and playful analog interaction. Now, I know this might sound like a bit of an odd combination of practices, but I will do my very best to explain how this works over the next 20 minutes using my PhD research as a case. So I thought I'd begin by explaining how my interest in playful analog approaches to data visualization started. So I've been working on data viz projects within the field of social innovation for roughly 8 years now. And what you see there are the usual outcomes from these projects. Charts that depict market sizes for glass waste applications, diagrams that quantify the environmental impacts of Australia's Antarctic infrastructure, and dashboards that show how organizations in the healthcare industry are capable of adopting to change. While I feel that I'm definitely in the right sector, I always somehow felt that there was something missing in the data viz work that I was doing. So at the same time as I was designing sunburst diagrams and flowcharts, I was also giving myself these quick playful exercises, or what Albert Einstein calls thought experiments, on a weekly basis. The brief to myself was simple: to visualize my week using both collaged imagery and numerical information, and to finish 6 styles within an hour. That image you see on the top right hand corner, for example, was from when I thought it was a really good idea to go on a fast for 20 hours. And it turns out that not eating for nearly a day just makes you very cranky and a very unpleasant person to be around. Then, as an extension of these thought experiments, I started playing with lines of inquiry inspired by passages in literature that had absolutely nothing to do with data. In response to these questions, I searched for quantitative data sets and depicted them using the same pictorial language in my weekly visual diary. That there, for example, is a question posed by Lewis Carroll in Alice in Wonderland. Why is a raven like a writing desk? I traced the etymology of the words raven and desk and found that there were zero commonalities between both words, and concluded that Mr. Carroll may simply have been on magic mushrooms when he posed that question and wrote Alice in Wonderland. Here's another question that I came up with after having read Marina Lvivka's novel, A Short History of Tractors in Ukrainian, asking, who are the toxic members in your family? Are they the ones who don't fit in, or are they the ones who judge them for it? And I've explored that question using data from the US Environmental Protection Agency, which identified 352 new pollutants in sewage sludge, unclassified due to a lack of risk assessment tools. Now, as I commenced my doctoral degree, I began to read the academic literature around play and playful design and started to really understand what I was actually doing by engaging with these thought experiments. In the fields of behavioral psychology and interaction design, play, as opposed to rule based games, has been proven to instill a sense of curiosity and allow people to be proactive, shape their own narratives, and make sense of the world. Play also needs to happen within a system or structure. One needs something to play with, be it a bag of marbles, pixels on a screen, or in my case, existing images and data. But within this system, play is messy, wild, and improvisational. In this sense, it can therefore be used as a transformative tool for subverting norms and standards that may be oppressive or no longer beneficial. And with that, I approach my own practice by challenging normative visualization techniques, infusing network diagrams like these, for example, with playful collage. I used that particular one to explore questions around shifting metaphorical representation in popular media, like Star Wars, to interrogate cultural protocols without having to fall into the trap of woke characterization or the vortex of postmodernist quote unquote truth. And I did these experiments with materiality too, looking at my own household's food consumption patterns through the amount of oxygen absorbers that came with packaged food that we ate over the course of a year. Not having a formal background in data science, this project explored how I, as a graphic designer and non expert data analyst, could design a data visualization through my own intuitive visual fluency and how the process could reveal insights into behavior and enable reflection. The design process using gelatin reflected 2021 as a year where self preservation was foremost on the general population's mind. Vaccinations, maintaining sanity in lockdown, and in some parts of the world, surviving natural disasters. The process of using this historical method of food preservation was a visceral experience. Sticky, disturbing, revolting, reeking of cow tendons. However, the creative, playful process with materials enabled me to build a metaphor that captured not only how much packaged food we ate, but allowed me to process feelings of anxiety that came with it and to illustrate the zeitgeist of survival during that year. So, this then got me thinking, what would happen if we gave non designers a chance to go through the same process and play with self tracking data using their own vernacular visual fluency? What insights could it give them, and could it actually change their behavior? And this is this is the question that led to my PhD thesis: Food Waste Ninjas and Sleeping Sheep, understanding the role of vernacular self-tracking data visualization in civic engagement and influencing habitual food wasting behaviors. Now, just to give you a super truncated background on data visualizations in digital self-tracking devices. So these have been found by many researchers to have the persuasive power to encourage day-to-day actions that reduce negative environmental impacts. This here, for example, is an app developed in Finland that allows households to estimate their yearly food waste in terms of euro value and carbon footprint. There is, however, growing concern over these trackers from ethical, equitable, and behavioral perspectives. As a top-down initiative from institutions, they can lead to a sense of surveillance and control, resulting in a lack of agency over one's own behaviors. Digital self-trackers can also perpetuate existing social and economic disparities, requiring access to expensive technology and relatively advanced levels of visual literacy. They can often exclude individuals from low-income households and children. And finally, the topic that I'm probably most interested in is that self-tracking technology can be an unreliable measure of lived experience. Normative visualization design practices that use geometric shapes can promote unhealthy self-scrutiny and fail to capture the complexities of reality, essential in understanding human behavior. So, to address these issues, my study looks at an analog, playful, participatory approach to designing self-tracking data visualizations. Now, just to clarify, this approach certainly isn't unique, and I've been inspired by some great precedents, like Jamie Snyder and her team's work on analog self-tracking to manage bipolar disorder, and the iconic Dear Data project by Georgia Lupi and Stephanie Posavec that visualize these designers' daily habits. So my study looks at the intersection of data physicalization, a practice that encodes data through bespoke, meaningful objects, the eudaimonic function of play, which suggests that even if play is not tangibly productive, it can elicit high levels of creative, independent behavior, and vernacular design, where non-experts rely on their intuitive visual fluency and access to materials to address specific pain points. These principles in design are then seen through a theoretical framework that amalgamates three models in consumer behavior: the theory of planned behavior, the habit alteration model, and motivation, ability, and opportunity framework. Now, this combined framework argues that behavior results from the interplay of intentions, abilities, and opportunities. And intentions come from intrinsic motivation, which refers to personal attitudes, goals, emotions, and existing habits, and as well as extrinsic motivations like rewards and punishment. Ability comes from the skill and knowledge to perform a behavior and an assessment of how easy or difficult it is to do. Opportunities dictated by elements like socio-cultural factors are also need to be present in order for behavior to occur. And through repetition and reflection, behavior can result in new habitual behavior. Now, I chose this multi-directional node link diagram to illustrate how these behavioral mechanisms may not be as linear or as hierarchical as other models might suggest. Now, why use food waste as a case? I really could sit here and rabbit on with statistics on the financial and environmental impact of food waste in Australia. But I'll show you this image here instead. This is a compost bin that I walk past every day where I live in Melbourne, which is an allegedly environmentally conscious Greens voting suburb. It's problematic not only because a whole shopping bag of perfectly edible vegetables has been disposed of, but it also highlights and over-relies on composting as a means of addressing food waste. It's also significant to note that in Australia, majority of food waste comes from households with working parents and their children, or over-providers, as they tend to equate being a good parent with providing more food than necessary. Now, going into the details of the study design. I took a longitudinal mixed method approach, triangulating three research instruments. First was a 9-week habit tracker deployed as a probe and analyzed through ethnographic content analysis, and a survey that addressed participants' frequency of performing food-saving behaviors before the probe, immediately after the probe, and 1 month after. The results were analyzed through a paired samples frequency test. And then there were 2 semi-structured interviews that gathered qualitative data on participants' initial motivation levels and clarified survey and probe results. And the transcripts were analyzed through thematic analysis. And this is what the 2-part probe looked like. Part 1 contained visual nudges and information that promoted actions such as eating leftovers and storing food properly. It also included 3 packets of recyclable googly eye stickers to mark particular food items that needed to be used first. Part 2 consisted of the trackers, which were designed as a set of 2 postcards with markers and pens, with prompts for respondents to visually encode whether they performed specific behaviors, such as we checked hunger levels before cooking and serving. Now, the participants consisting of overprovider households were divided into two groups. An experiment group A were given parts 1 and 2 and saw each other's de-identified results online, while a control group B with the same demographic profile were only given part 1, so no tracker. Now, the study yielded quite rich visual data, with participants representing their food-saving behaviors in a variety of ways, from sheep to rainbows to numbers, and a large amount of voluntary text-based data pointing towards high levels of interest and engagement despite it being a longitudinal study. One of the participants even made his own food waste reduction campaign t-shirt inspired by the googly eyes. So after triangulating the results, there were a number of significant findings, 3 of which I'll explain here. The first is that the self-tracker led to the formation of new food-saving habitual behaviors. The paired samples frequency test showed that both groups A and B increased the number of times in which they performed food-saving actions. However, only group A, that's the group with the trackers, showed that they were able to sustain or increase the frequency of these actions a month after. These graphs here, for example, show the frequency of planning meals to be cooked for a set number of days, illustrating that more households in Group A were able to maintain this a month after the probe was deployed. And this was the predominant pattern in the rest of the behaviors that were measured. Now, the second significant finding was that a vernacular approach instilled a sense of autonomy and accountability. 2/3 of the households chose to stray away from conventional graphs and charts and represented their actions through metaphors like ninjas, which pointed towards how precise, coordinated actions in the household were necessary to attain the mission of avoiding food waste, and sleeping sheep, which alluded to families losing focus on certain food-saving activities on particular days. Having a playful mindset allowed people to choose, act, and express themselves in ways that were meaningful to them. Households in Group A mentioned having a greater sense of accountability because the visualizations were their own creations. And lastly, the self-tracker was found to play a role in external motivation. So scrutinizing the results against the theoretical framework revealed that sociocultural factors and spatio-temporal environments acted as external motivators rather than macro-level opportunities. So those factors were moved from opportunity to extrinsic motivation on the other side of the model. And autonomy and agency were introduced as intrinsic motivators. Sociocultural factors were found to have a closer relationship to emotions. For example, participants reported feelings of pride from using an entire head of cauliflower because it was seen as doing the right thing according to specific cultural norms. So that's the final complex web of factors there, tenuously moving to visualize how factors that lead to human behavior can influence each other and how behavior models need to be interrogated when applied in particular contexts. Now, I'll just wrap up with lessons learned from this research. First, while there's no one perfect behavior change theory, using theory can offer a guide for designers to construct interventions, unpack active ingredients, and identify common factors contributing to observed outcomes. Second, I'm by no means suggesting that vernacular visualizations be a replacement for digital tracking technology, but that they can be very well used as a tool to augment existing frameworks and offer alternatives. And finally, a playful approach enhances the potential of data visualization to increase motivation, allow access to broader audiences, subvert norms, instigate conversation, and enable agency. So hopefully that's clarified how the hell socially responsible design, data visualization, and playful analog interaction can all work together. And thank you so much for listening. And I'll turn you back over to Darian.
Thanks. It was quite. I didn't know that it's the whole thing is actually coming also from the PhD. That's
Yeah.
actually super nice. Yeah, cool. I also just realized there was a hide button from the transfer, which is okay. We will
Oh,
we will in
was
the
it on
next
there?
time. Yeah. That's
Oops.
okay. That's okay. Just for everyone, there is a QR code. I see there are 2 questions, and I see there is also 1 question live on YouTube. We are collecting them. I'm just now putting a QR code for everyone. Please feel free to scan this code that's leading you to Slido. So ask questions to Reg. I think there are very interesting questions already. Yeah, so we will discuss that. So I'm putting this away, and now Cathryn is entering the stage, and we are going out. Let's see, Cathryn, the stage is yours. So feel free to share your screen.
All right. Cool.
Okay, here we go. And yeah, you can start.
Cool. All right. Howdy, y'all. My name is Cathryn Ploehn. I go by Cat. My pronouns are she or they. And I'm a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, teaching interaction design and data visualization through the lens of ecology. This is my website that I'm conveniently showing y'all. Today, though, I'm sharing with y'all my research practice, which is called Feral Data Visualization, which reimagines data visualization for the ecological, queer, feminist, and embodied using botanical simulation. Of course, I teach at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm speaking to y'all from Austin, but also I'm speaking to y'all from a specific ecological place or bioregion. I'm at the cross section of the Crossland Timbers and Blackland Prairies, 2 bioregions home to familiar flora and fauna like grackles, our famous bird, pecan trees, and live oaks, all of which host countless insects and birds like the grackles, but many other types of flora that are underappreciated but persistent, like lamb's quarters and purslane, who regenerate disturbed soil, but also historically have fed the humans living on these lands. There's this delicate mesh of life immediately around me that makes life possible here in Austin, the Blackland Prairies, Turtle Island, including my own. But it's so very easy to forget that our lives are intertwined with just a few inches of topsoil. And yet, for a large chunk of my youth, and for many others like me, the living and dying of the plants in my hometown of suburban Dallas remained an illegible language. We are so biologically and otherwise interdependent upon land and place, and yet so many of us are strangers to the flora and fauna, the fungi making clean air and water possible, blind to even the shape of a pecan leaf. Instead, I was very busy pursuing my academics and my career. And after my bachelor's degree, I researched and made data visualizations at the National Institute of Standards and Technologies here in the United States. And I read some of the big data viz hits at the time, encountering the best practices, emphasizing data, ink, rich geometric forms, lines, circles, squares, and so on. You can see my ggplot cheat sheet here, which was my best friend in those days, still is. These practices are very appealing in their minimalism, but they come at a cost. They simplify the phenomena described through data and obscure the hand and land of the designer. In other words, my nascent data viz practice was also estranged from place and ecology. That is to say, our data visualizations reflect our own estrangement from the ecologies our lives depend on. That might seem innocent, but estrangement from ecology is actually a fertile ground for destruction. We readily extract from quote unquote natural resources that are framed to us as invisible, inert, or as objects, pushing the world's ecosystems to the brink. You might know, of course, we're experiencing a warming climate, but also a big extinction at the time, to say the least. This pattern of extraction through disembodiment, or as some people say, othering, repeats everywhere in struggles for justice. And we see this dynamic in moments where violence is somehow justified. We're seeing a lot of that in the news and historically. Meanwhile, weirdly enough, we see this pattern of extraction through disembodiment in our own data viz practices. Specifically, the practice of data viz often requires a transformation of the world and its phenomena into computable bits of data. It can be often a very violent reduction of phenomena into categories for analysis and, by extension, control. For artist and author James Bridle, this violence emerges from forcing the world to conform to that representation, which erases, degrades, tortures, and kills those things and beings which do not fit within the assumed system of representation. And reading this paper here on screen, Feminist Data Visualization by Cathryn Ploehn and Lauren Klein, 2016, introduced me to this notion and horrified me, because I love data viz, forcing me to reflect upon this kind of violence in often very, very useful data visualization norms. And I even pursued a master's thesis at Carnegie Mellon in interaction design to digest these norms into my own practice. And of course, this paper turned into the book Data Feminism, which came out, I think, in 2020. Very good book, by the way. But what are these norms? Some of them are on screen. Color schemes belie the in-betweenness erased from the imposition of categories. Jenny Odell has a great talk on the in-between, by the way. Abstract shapes also disembody the phenomena described by the data, and an abstract body is easier to analyze, control, and manipulate. So that leaves us looking at a data visualization, relating to it, interacting with it, in this kind of posture of analysis and control, for better, for worse. Thinking, how does this compare to that? And studies have shown that minimalist geometric forms emit this kind of truthfulness that's actually kind of a hallucinated objectivity, whereas knowledge is actually situated in who created it, which you can read papers from Donna Haraway and Joanna Drucker about this kind of feminist take on knowledge is situated. But one thing really stuck out to me. By centering abstract and disembodied forms, the prevailing aesthetics of data visualization actually also mirror our disengagement with place-based ecology. In other words, estrangement sets the seed for the extraction of our ecologies to the point of crisis, and our data visualization practices tend to be complicit. Now, don't get me wrong, I still use these geometric primitives, these aesthetic norms, for a good chunk of my practice while making data viz, and they're still quite useful. But there's also a critical need to reflect and put into balance this type of practice with something else. And this is really demonstrated when we visualize data such as ones about death. This is from very dithered, I like dither, this is a very dithered image from the New York Times during the COVID lockdown during 2020. I wonder how we might move beyond a posture of analysis when we encounter data like this. So instead of comparing September, oh, we're at a trough, to May, oh, we're at a peak, how can we move out of that comparison and control? In other words, how might we reimagine data visualization away from extraction? But I kind of want to zoom out a little bit and thinking, okay, regardless of data visualization, how do we encounter extraction and estrangement in the first place? What kind of mindset should we have to encounter our own crises and the extraction that fuels it? So in the midst of crisis fueled by estrangement, our path forward must mend our relationship with the living world through a responsibility toward it. We must share the stakes of living and dying. So again, for scholars like Donna Haraway and Ursula Le Guin, de-estrangement means building a sense of shared fate as beings of the earth. It means making kin. In making kin, the distinction between us and quote unquote nature melts away into a solidarity of our entangled fate in living. There's no going out into nature. You are nature. You're in it. Pretty crazy. In other words, we acknowledge our reliance on symbiosis with the plants, animals, and fungi around us, and in the case of our microbiome, inside of us too. In forging kinfolk, attention is the starting point. As author and artist Jenny Odell writes, when we behold each other, we become beholden to one another. Potawatomi botanist and author Robin Wall Kimmerer argues that paying attention is a form of reciprocity with the living world. That is to say, we must behold the intelligence and language of our ecologies around us immediately. The visual evidence of living, dying, growing, decaying that are shown in the plants, fungi, animal, and more all around us, outside your window, maybe in your home. So while pursuing my master's degree and grappling with the countless problems that I saw in data viz as revealed by many wonderful artists and scholars, I mentioned Joanna Drucker, Jenny Odell, Donna Haraway, Mimi Onuoha, I found myself while grappling with those problems in Western Pennsylvania, where I could very easily travel to witness some of the remaining old growth forests in the continent, forests that are never before cut down. On my first visit to one of these parts of the forest in a mushroom club's foray, I found myself very lost in an incomprehensible density of woods and life. Pretty terrifying as a suburban kid, doubly terrifying as a suburban kid from the prairie. The trees, and this is a picture on screen of one of those trees I was looking up at. The trees exhaled clouds of mist while polypores, these beautiful burgundy mushrooms, emerged from deep beds of moss. Now, in grad school, I was reading theory about deep ecology, Gaian systems, and the ecological turn. Being here was nothing like the theory. It was overwhelming, and I stood in the beautiful presence of these massive eastern hemlock trees before me. Now, beholding these eastern hemlock trees made me start to become beholden to not only their beauty, but how they lived and died. So in the face of crisis, in summary, we must make kin with our ecologies through paying attention to them. But loving those trees while you're in their forest is easy. In everyday suburban life and urban life, otherwise full of concrete and screens, holding this kind of ecological attention is a very delicate matter. For Ursula Le Guin, making kin is a great reach outward of the mind and imagination. For her, it was supported through the use of tools like poetry. But as a data viz designer, selfishly, and also one who loves justice-oriented projects, I was pondering, well, how can data viz help? In structuring our attention to the phenomena of the world, data visualization seems like poised as the most potent tool for kinship. And in fact, one of my favorite authors and artists, James Bridle, again, acknowledges that noticing our symbiosis, potentially through tools for gathering and displaying data, is a potential balm for the opaque technological infrastructures of systems of analysis, determination, and control, many of which rely on data and visualization to exert power. But despite the promise of using data for good, like I mentioned before, the familiar theories and methods of visualizing data in neat, minimalist shapes were at odds with beholding the truly unruly nature of symbiosis. So in my master's degree, I'm like, okay, well, what else am I going to do? How can we reimagine data for making kin? That's when I began to make my escape from the confines of simple geometry. Outside the cage of primitive shapes emerged my practice, feral data visualization, which reimagines data visualization for the ecological, queer, feminist, and embodied using botanical simulation. Feral data viz reorients data viz as a kin-making tool. Each project takes the form of a hand-coded botanical simulation that attempts to tell us about data while embedding the stories of plant life that find a way between the cracks of our Earth in crisis. By botanical simulation, I mean things like L systems. Zoom in here. This is from the book Algorithmic Beauty of Plants, but also things like phyllotaxis and space colonization and other kind of algorithms, but made bespoke to a place. So encountering data through the visual language of a place-based botanical simulation might offer us an alternative to the typical attention of control and analysis that a geometric type data viz gives us. Instead, botanical simulations ask us to behold the data encoded. In this sense, beholding means a special kind of attention, a special kind of observation without the intent for control or instrumentalization. You might be familiar from perhaps Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing. There's mention of a philosopher, Martin Buber, who wrote about I, it versus I, thou kind of attention. Or you might have read The Spiral Dance, which is a book about witchcraft, in which the author compares flashlight vision versus starlight vision. I'm talking about the I, thou, the starlight vision, the noticing without controlling. Mindfulness, maybe. I want to lay out 3 qualities of botanical simulation that might create space for the possibility of beholding. And those include place-based metaphor, embodiment, and care. And I'll talk through each of these qualities through the lens of 2 of my Feral Data Viz projects. In my project, Suga Convictio, which was my grad school thesis, master's thesis, I experimented with using a cellular automata simulation of old growth Eastern hemlock roots to tangibly demonstrate the vitality and interconnected nature of the community of my grad school cohort. Old growth forests, like the Eastern hemlock forests of Western Pennsylvania that I just mentioned, they connect and share nutrients through networks of rhizomes. These networks are a natural metaphor for communities of people whose feelings of vivaciousness and weariness can spread throughout the community, like the concept of social contagion, but also represents how we depend on one another around us in community. So very quickly, I'll just show you the data viz. So what's happening here is each tree is assigned a random kind of level of vivaciousness. And the trees or the people not feeling as vivacious, their roots will grow less densely and robustly, and the folks feeling more vivacious will have more robust roots. So you can see that in the legend on the left. So 3 things are happening here. First, this is a place-based botanical form, which in its design reveals the story of the designer, me, my ecological home at the time in Western Pennsylvania. In visualizing these interconnected Eastern hemlock roots, the data visualization conveys my relationship with those forests in Western Pennsylvania. And this placefulness of the visualization conveys the situatedness and constructedness of the data in time, place, culture, and person, which is kind of a thing for feminist knowledge practices. Secondly, this generative system, the simulation, offers a more poetic embodied display of feeling that affords an ambiguity and eludes a neat categorization. There's an intentional gradient between the roots as the trees connect with one another. There's an intentional fuzziness of the weaker trees versus the stronger trees, sort of in the middle. And this like ambiguity of the botanical form, the rhizomes and leaves, again, defy kind of a neatness of categorization that kind of interrupts the mood of analyzing, inviting you to just kind of notice. And these wiggly cellular automata roots of these simulated trees convey that scale of vivaciousness from barren to dense without sharp edges. So whereas a geometric data viz obscures a body as encoded by data, this botanical data viz centers plant bodies as tangible displays of living and dying. Simulated roots grow before your eyes. It's good. Conveying an active reaching out of support towards one another. After learning the language of this data visualization, perhaps it may leave a mark of familiarity and recognition. The vision of interconnected Eastern hemlock roots leaves an imprint on the mind. Vegetizing your sensorium, in the words of one of my favorite anthropologists, Natasha Myers. Vegetizing your sensorium towards these delicate ecosystems fighting for life. Perhaps the next time you look at a tree, kind of imagine their root networks, wondering if they connect to each other. After grad school, completing this thesis, I returned to my home bioregion of the Blackland Prairies, Austin, Texas, and began designing data visualization wreaths due to lives lost from anti-trans violence in partnership with the organization Data Science. The data is collected and painstakingly archived by UK software engineer Anna Jane Metcalf. My collaborator Kelsey and I wondered how this phenomena about data about lives lost might be shown without the disembodying effect of geometric primitives and without the gender essentializing tendencies of typical humanoid icons. This is like a big conversation in this space. So I returned to the massive bald cypress trees that stabilize the edges of waterways in the region. They bear witness to water and time for hundreds of years. In fact, cypress trees on the UT Austin campus were there before the campus, the university existed, hundreds of years. And they remain as invisible shade givers to passerby on UT's campus. And yet their leaves are precious and beautiful in the palm of your hand as they shed every winter. So we created a data visualization wreath nodding to historic mourning and grief practices. And let me zoom out and just show it to you. So we created this data visualization wreath in which each leaf holds the name of a trans or gender fluid or gender diverse person whose life was taken too soon, often through obvious violence. And in the process of my work, creating each leaf to be unique was the main focus so that you could behold the whole collection of names. I'll even zoom in and ponder. What's interesting, though, in the creation of this wreath, in the process of this work, I found myself staring at leaves for hours, at these precious bald cypress leaves, wondering, imagining, dreaming, to create a botanical simulation true enough to the plant form, and these are not close. Creating something that's close enough requires a deep attention, a deep discipline, a deep gaze. So I look at the leaves, return to the code, type some stuff out, return to the leaves, no, type some stuff out, return to the leaves. In this cycle of tinkering and pondering produced a wonder and frustration in the incomprehensible presence of just this, what would come across at first as a simple leaf. And my time with these cypress leaves provided a sort of observational knowledge, tacit, embodied, visceral, impossible to gain otherwise, impossible to gain without this kind of design process. And so in working Fearly, the most fascinating transformation emerged from within my hand and heart as a data viz designer. In constructing a simulation about the minute visual details of the growth and decay of plant life, this kind of observation doesn't really translate in an average photo found on, say, iNaturalist, which is a plant identification app, or in a quick image search. Feral data viz by necessity requires you to emerge from your office into the forest or the creek or the prairie and find that richness of information outside in the plants, and they will explode in beauty and complexity upon observation. And in fact, yeah, I can tell you, there's something else there. There's this ache of affection. Observation over time deepened my intimacy with these plants as they lived, expanding my capacity for care and agency, such that when I walk on UT's campus day to day, I just can't help but like appreciate those cypress trees, look at their leaves as they grow each spring with a beautiful dark to light green gradient, and even notice kind of a different variety of a cypress tree and be surprised. So comparing a bald cypress to a Montezuma cypress, these little details like scream at me now, whereas before they were invisible. Well, let me return to my main page. So designing through this language of botanical livability all around us might help us. Okay, thank you. Designing through this language of botanical livability around us might help us forge infinite learning and kinship through observation. We become for and of place. The effect of this practice within the designer might be the sense of belonging that, going back to the start of this presentation, might mend the pain of ecological estrangement, giving us kind of this sense of solidarity and shared living with the botanical kin all around us. And that's all I got. Thanks for your time.
Super. Thank you. Let me go on full screen with Reg. Okay, cool. Here we are. Yeah. Super. Thanks a lot. We have questions, which is great news. We actually have them in YouTube, but we have them also in Slido. There is one which is very upvoted, which is very interesting, and I think it's not aimed to anyone, so I guess it could be for both. An anonymous person is asking, how would you suggest translating this type of practice? So actually both of you have been presenting a practice for people that do not have a design background and do not really have a great relationship with data. So what would be kind of your approach towards kind of the hint how the people could work without a design background? Your takeouts.
Well, I think that was, am I on?
Yeah, you are. Yeah, please.
Cool. Yeah, I think that was precisely the idea behind having a vernacular approach to data visualization. Didn't really need any expert knowledge, or people didn't really need a design background. So even children could do it, and people who have no access to technology could do it. So the impact that I foresee or the applications that I see this working is in a school setting where students and their families kind of participate over a school term. So yeah, I think a vernacular approach is kind of one way of addressing that.
Cool.
Yeah, on my part, the kind of analogous or maybe earlier practice of engaging with ecology in this way is drawing the plants that you see. And you don't have to be good. You just have to like make that connection from eye to hand. And that kind of gets at some of the same sort of connection that I'm describing here. And what's interesting is that plants reveal the conditions of where they live. And that's sort of a visceral encoding of phenomena. Like if you expand dataviz to be, well, what shows the trace of other things? That's a kind of cool way to see dataviz. So drawing to learn.
And you would say that is topic independent. So kind of you could use that analogy also for, let's say, I don't know, client topics are kind of very, let's take a topic like cancer or something. Would you also take nature for the topic of cancer and kind of how many people suffer of cancer or something? So is that a general thing or topic related? like this opening and observing?
I think, if it depends on whether the metaphor is perfectly suitable as a disclaimer, but I think that you can find metaphors kind of in ecologies around us that resonate in experience, even if the translation isn't perfect. It's still a bridge.
I see that. It just exactly. I'm addressing that because, for my perception, also what Reg was showing, kind of using photographs and images, is kind of quite advanced, because you have to not just depict the data, but you have to reflect on the second meaning, or kind of the meaning of the metaphor that you now created and combined. Like Reg has been using the jelly with food and kind of putting the food parts into the new photographs you created. And I think it needs really awareness, kind of compared to just abstract pie charts or abstract forms, anyways, any form. It's just that once you work really with something which is like an object taken from the real world, you have to look if the metaphor fits, or kind of, is there kind of a second meaning which is maybe not perfect, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. So there is a question. Actually, I have now another possibility to show a question. This was to Reg here. Alice was asking, very cool, Reg. Did you ask participants to track the actual foods that they ate, or kind of food waste, or just the behaviors, meal planning? What motivated the decision?
So I did make it an option for them if they wanted to track the specific foods they ate, and if they wanted to quantify it or not. I really wanted them to be able to shape their own tracking process. Not many did, but I think this is kind of the beauty of this, is that it's just about repeating behaviors and not necessarily quantifying them or putting labels on it. But because my from reading all the behavioral frameworks, it's not so much about what it is; it's about doing something repetitively, like habits form this way. So it's not about the quantification; it's just a matter of, like, actually doing something rather than identifying specifically what these things are. And sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Second, let me just highlight again. There you go.
Oh, yeah.
But you answered it.
Yeah, I kind of answered that.
That's good. There was another one asking you, Reg, if your PhD is online. Somebody who's really liking it, so couldn't find it.
Oh, no, it's due to be submitted in July, so it's not quite ready yet.
Not ready yet. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
We're working on it.
That's cool. Are you both actually working for university, or are you working also for clients or freelancing or other projects?
Yeah, so I work at a university, at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in Melbourne, and I do kind of half and half. So
half and half. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Cap?
Yeah, I'm a professor at the University of Texas at Austin.
Full. Okay, cool.
Or not full, but assistant professor of practice.
Okay, good. Super. Let me see if we have one more interesting one. That's a good one. That's Cathryn. Can you give an example where you change your data with practice based on your insights?
Yeah, totally. The example I showed in my presentation, like the framework of the presentation, the underlying structure is called an Apollonian gasket, where circles nest within each other. And typically I could make those circles and stop there. And you kind of see that. I can share my screen, but there's this interesting thing that happens when I took that gasket of like clean, crispy circles and added kind of a rhizome generating code that created instead of the circles like being perfect and enclosing from one another, the rhizome metaphor in my presentation itself has this sort of like everything's connected kind of vibe that is emphasized through that visual.
Got it. Good. You want to show it? No, it's good, right? Or are you about to show it?
Yes. One second. Is it visible?
Oh yeah, here it comes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So this section about extraction was clean circles, whereas the rest was fuzzy rhizome.
Yeah. A user question to this, if you are now sharing the screen. The tool, is this R or how did you program it?
So this is all JavaScript. I have a combination of P5, JS, Paper.js, D3, JS, but I also recommend processing. It's a great community, P5 and processing.
Cool. And one also last question, tool question, because that's so much upvote and always these tool questions. Reg, how did you do the animated network in your presentation?
I got someone to do it.
Okay, that's the best one.
In After Effects, yeah, because I can't animate to save my life, so I got someone else to help me do it.
Cool, super. Okay, yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, Gabrielle is missing, the first person, so that's why we are right on time in 1 hour sharp. Thank you both that you joined. For everyone, if you liked it, share it. If you have suggestions for new topics, new speakers, just contact me. Yeah, enjoy the day. For everyone who has still kind of the beginning of day, like Cathryn. For everyone else who's finishing the day, right, Reg, have a good night and see you soon. Bye-bye.